Deanna Levine, can you describe, or is it possible to gauge the extent of this issue? You've spoken about tragedies, you've spoken about families really suffering over the generations, but how do you gauge the extent of this issue?
Well, I'm very pleased that you've given me the opportunity to say this, because the numbers involved who experience these problems is actually very, very low, because in the vast majority of cases, I'm happy to say that husbands and wives will agree to the get, and so it's not necessary. Having said that, however, the magnitude of the problems which can arise if there is no get, it's out of all proportion to the numbers.
One, of course, respects religions and their traditions, any religion, but as a lawyer, do you feel frustration, or do you think this is an inevitable part of being Jewish, that you have to respect all this?
As I mentioned earlier, I have been aware of all these problems simmering away, some rather more public than others, but it's a distorted vision, or a distorted image, if you like, that's presented, because the problems can be ginormous, but in fact it affects a very small number of people. What's said is that the rabbis are looking at this, and they are trying to find ways religiously which will address these problems. They're very much aware of them and are doing what they can. In fact, I would say it's the most hotly debated topic, if you like, within the academic rabbinic world today. So they are trying.
Well, they're grappling, but what chances are there of them succeeding? What route do you think they might take, or perhaps they're taking, towards progress? What possible solution, or perhaps what would you like to see?
There's no question of having any change as such within the law, because that is not an option. It's not the way the religion works, because the religion is quite clear of what the basics are. Having said that, what traditionally has happened over the centuries is that the law is interpreted. They look at the sources and they will interpret them in a way which may possibly enable them to find a solution. So, as I see it, it's about interpretation. They are working on it much more slowly than we would all like.
Do you think the civil law in England, and we all know it's slightly different in Scotland, we know that you're able to practice in both places, but do you think in either of those places, as it affects us here in the UK, there's room for more reform? We've had a fairly recent act that you've already said has helped to some extent. Would you like to see further reform there?
Well, it's a very interesting question, because for me personally it's very topical, because only the other day I came across a law which is in Ontario where, for example, say there's a financial settlement that has to be agreed or decreed by the court. Then it goes through the court process. Now let's assume that it's the wife who's making the application, but the husband is actually refusing to give the get. What can be done in that situation is that the court will exclude the husband from any possibility of defending or responding to that financial application, and will look at it only from the wife's perspective, trying to be as fair as possible given what they know of the husband's situation. But having said that, it excludes the husband. Now, there's nothing like hitting the pocket for effectiveness, and I feel, I thought, if that could be applied here, that would really, really just get rid of those very, even smaller number of cases that we have. The civil law at the moment as it is here doesn't work if the husband doesn't want the civil divorce. And of course, so we're left with this financial situation.
Barring any further interpretation, which may alleviate the issue to some extent,
yes.
Really the thrust has got to come from the civil courts.
Yes, but if you consider, and this is why the civil law recently came to be passed, and the government accepted that it was an issue that could be addressed civilly. At the time of the marriage, the government we've got in place a civil wedding ceremony that enables the religious ceremony also to take place at the same time. In the same way as you have a dual wedding ceremony, why should there not also be a dual divorce procedure? And that's what this law, it mirrors, if you like, as far as it can, the dual aspect of the religious and civil wedding ceremonies.
I'm intrigued by this question because what we've been discussing today is now set in the context of other religions as well, who would like their own codes, conventions, their own tribunals recognised by the civil courts. I mean, Islam at the moment is asserting itself perhaps in a way that it hasn't done before in England and the UK generally. Do you think that creates difficulties for the Jewish faith, or are you happy to see, you know, this whole issue to proceed on the basis of fairness to all religions?
When the government drafted this legislation, it included quite a technical piece of law which does enable any other religion where they have similar issues, where, you know, cooperation is required and so on, actually to approach the government and arrange for that law to be applied to that other religion. Certainly where those issues do occur, this law does not only apply to the Jews, it can be made equally to apply to any other religion.
How many women do you estimate, or perhaps it's impossible to say, do you estimate are in that situation in Britain at the moment?
I wouldn't like to hazard a guess, but the numbers are very low. But as I said earlier, and I would like to emphasise this, the suffering that they endure is well in excess of the numbers.
And just lastly, and you referred to it earlier when we were talking, would you like to see lawyers making themselves more aware of this whole situation we've been discussing today? Or do you think there's a need perhaps by the Law Society to put out more information? I mean, you're obviously doing your bit. You're one of the main sources of information on this matter, but really, should it be left to someone like yourself? Shouldn't the Law Society be chipping in as well in an official way?
The Law Society has been very helpful in a number of ways. They invited us to comment on the Professional Code of Conduct for family lawyers, and so there's a section in that. Also they put on a seminar which dealt with the religious issues, not just within Jewish divorce, but I was one of the speakers, along with my colleague, my co-author of Getting Your Get. And we had Muslim, Sikh, Hindu and Jewish speakers, all about the issues relating to divorce, and that was organised by the Law Society. The reason I've been writing these articles is for this information, the legislation, to get out into the public domain so that more solicitors are made aware of it.
Great, well thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.